Alright, welcome to the 2.4 update for my budget Voll-less Mjolner Marauder build that uses the Juggernaut class. So there's a few things that I'm going to do here. First, I'm going to explain what the build goals for the build were when I originally designed it. Then I'm going to explain what changed in patch 2.4. Then I'm going to go through my gear and passives, and finally I'll talk about all the mechanics that make the build work. So, first off, the goals of the build. This build had two main goals. The first one was be able to maintain a high level of physical damage resistance / immunity, and the second is to be able to have a solid form of life sustain without having to use the Life Leech gem in the Mjolnir. Now, these are both things that builds that use the Voll-less Devotion amulet have, and those are both things that I wanted to do. So, how do we accomplish these? So the way I accomplish the first one, which is the high level of physical damage immunity, is by having a very high armor rating. As you can see, I have almost 38,000 armor, and when I activate my armor flask, it jumps to almost 64,000 armor. Now, the way this is accomplished is by having a high armor chest piece, a high armor shield, and then generally high armor gear pieces. And then in the passive tree, we use the Juggernaut node Unbreakable, which doubles the base armor from our body armor. So that's like our chest here has a base armor of about 3,500, which is quite a lot. Then there's armor nodes on the tree and so forth. Now, the second thing, which was to get Life Leech without having to socket Life Leech in the Mjolnir, was we use Warlord's Mark on Blasphemy. Not only does this generate endurance charges for us, it also gives enemies some stun chance, and also the main thing about it is our Life Leech. This actually gives me 2.2% Life Leech against an enemy with no curse reduction because it has 10% curse effect from Blasphemy. Now, what changed with this build in 2.4? Well, the biggest change was to the way the Mjolnir itself works. Now, what this used to be is the wording was already all the same, except it said 30% chance to cast a socketed lightning spell on hit. And the way that it worked is it cast all the socketed lightning spells whenever you hit. So it would, if you had two spells linked in here, it would cast them both at the same time for every hit. But what they changed it to is now it's 100% chance to trigger on hit, but it's only one spell per trigger event, which means that only one spell is cast for every hit, and if you have more than one spell, it'll alternate between them in a clockwise order around the item. They also give it an internal cooldown of I think 1/10 of a second is what has been postulated, although they've never said anything official about it. Now, because of this changed the way that my build generated charges. Because now I can't rely on not proccing Mjolnir to generate power charges, and instead I have to generate them. I pretty much assume that Discharge is going to be cast every other hit, because I have two spells socketed in there. So the things that changed in my build itself. So I used to run a total of 6 power charges. I now run 5. I dropped this power charge node here and finished Celestial Judgment and began pathing into the spell damage for Light of Divinity. That's the only thing that's changed passive-wise in this build. And I can still get to 5 power charges, and I'll explain that eventually. Now, I'm going to explain my gearing and my passives, and all my different skill links. So I'll begin with my helmet. So I have a high armor rare, as I talked about earlier. This is enchanted with 20% chance for discharge to not consume charges. This enchant is not mandatory, but it's always useful. And here you just want to look for life, good resist, high armor, and potentially intelligence or strength, because getting those helps you maintain the stats you need for your Mjolnir. This is a 4-link. There's 3 different 4-link setups that this build uses. They can be in any of your gear pieces, it doesn't really matter. And this one contains Blood Rage, Lightning Golem, Increased Duration, and Vengeance. We use Blood Rage to amplify our attack speed and give us a little bit of Frenzy Charge generation, which helps for clearing packs. but the biggest thing is faster. If you attack faster, you can proc the Mjolnir faster. Then Lightning Golem gives us attack and cast speed, so this is once again very nice. And Vengeance, here you see this is a counter attack. I use this because Vengeance can proc the Mjolnir because it's a hit, so you can potentially just stand AFK and enemies will hit you and it'll proc this and your Mjolnir will go off. Next, I'm going to move on to my gloves. So your gloves on this build are going to be the Repentance unique gloves because this build needs more DPS, and getting free Global Iron Will out of your gloves is a great way to do this. If you're not playing with Voll-less Devotion, you can also use Repentance in those builds as well, but typically I've found in my own builds that do use it that I like having a good life piece with resists and attack speed, but this build really likes having Repentance. And in here is my cast when damage taken setup, which both skills are supported by Ink Restoration. We have Immortal Call for a little bit of extra physical immunity, and Blade Vortex. Now, the reason Blade Vortex is here is to generate extra power charges, and I'll talk about this more later. Again, this is your second full link setup. This can be pretty much anywhere. And on your gloves, you really do want Attack with Decree of Fury or Commandment of Fury or Word of Fury or whatever on hit. What that does is it fires out an arc of piercing projectiles. Every time those hit, that counts as a Mjolnir hit. So it can proc the Mjolnir, and it's thus very powerful and helps a lot with clear speed. And then on your boots, you can run an armor rare. You can see here I have one with just life and tri-res and move speed. Not the best. We have a move speed enchant. That's pretty nice for clear speed. You can have things like life leech, or if you've killed recently, or life regeneration, that kind of thing. It's just try to get a useful enchant, and this is one of the ones that's quite good. And then we'll move on to our and this contains my movement skills in a 4-link. We have Shield Charge, Leap Slam, linked with faster attacks, and Fortify. So again, the 4-link setups that I have in my boots, my gloves, and my helmets can be swapped around between the pieces. There's nothing special about having them in any particular piece. And then the chest piece. So the most important thing on the chest piece is to have a high armor rating, preferably with life and some resist. I would say, aim for an armor rating of at least 1600. What this will do is it'll double the base effectiveness of your armor when you're using the node I mentioned earlier in the Juggernaut tree. Now this contains our 5-link primary trigger skill for our Mjolnir, which is Molten Strike, linked with greater multiple projectiles, faster attacks, Fortify, and Multi-Strike. In the last socket I have socketed Reckoning. It's another counter attack, and again this helps to proc the Mjolnir when we block an attack. Then onto the shield. So you want a high armor shield here. You can use the unique Lionized Shield as a starter piece and then move to a better armor and resist shield with life later on. I've skinned it with Rise of the Phoenix because I like the way it looks. I use this to hold my auras. I'd recommend using your shield to hold your auras. You want to run Warlord's Mark on Blasphemy, as I talked about earlier, and Determination. Using our auras helps us compensate for not having a Voll-less Devotion in terms of physical immunity and life recovery. So that's what these are used for. Now I'm going to talk about your jewelry. So in the belt slot, you just want to look for life and resists, preferably with strength. As you can see, I have that here. This belt is not the greatest thing in the world, but it's enough to make this build work, and I used it when I originally made this build back in Perandus, and I haven't changed it since. In your other ring slot, besides the Rumir's Banquet, which I'll talk about in a bit, you want life and resist, preferably with strength. Pretty basic stuff, you can see that here. Then you want to use your amulet slot to cover the rest of your stat requirements for the Mjolnir. So this particular amulet gives me, 55 strength, and 37 plus 29 is a lot of dexterity. It's actually 66 dexterity and 37 intelligence. So this amulet boosts my stats enough to be able to actually use the Mjolnir, which requires 410 strength and 300 int. You can potentially use a different amulet here, and a great one to get you started is the Adzuri's Foible unique amulet because it'll make your everything require less attributes to use. But I'd recommend getting a good rare with attributes once you have the currency to afford one. They're usually not too expensive. And then in your other ring slot, obviously you want the Ramira's Banquet unique ring to generate power charges when you don't crit. This enables us to generate power charges on hit, and there's an interaction that generates extra power charges, which I'll explain later. And you want a corrupted one because you don't actually want critical chance with this build because it's not a resolute technique build, and so we don't want to crit too often. So we lose our power charges, as you can see on the disadvantage there. And finally, of course, your weapon is Mjolner, and this contains Ball Lightning, Discharge, and both of them linked to Lightning Penetration. I'll explain why the spells are in here, why the ones I'm using are here after I talk about my passive tree. So as you can see, I am a Juggernaut. Our Ascendancy passives include Unbreakable, Undeniable, Unyielding, and Unstoppable. In terms of priority when you're leveling, I'd recommend Undeniable followed by Unbreakable. And I personally took Unyielding in the Merciless Laboratory and then Unstoppable from the Uber Laboratory. If you ever swap into Val's Devotion, you'll need to spec out of a couple of these to be able to get Unflinching and Unrelenting. But that's a slightly different build, and that's not how this character is quite optimized. So we have a focus on armor in our passives. We have things like Soul of Steel and the associated wheel. We have stats and life. We also pick up some accuracy nodes because, again, this is not a resolute technique build, and more accuracy makes us attack faster thanks to how Undeniable works. We've pathed up into the life wheel here. Our jewel sockets oftentimes have attack speed and life on them. This one has attack speed and some shock chance and a little bit of stats. This one has life and mana on hit. There's armor clusters here, and we path up into Templar as well as down into Duelist for a few nodes. But there's a lot of nodes going into the Templar area and into Witch. Now, keystone-wise, the only one we take is Elemental Overload. So we generate occasional crits with this build, and that enables us to get 40% more elemental damage, which is huge and enables the build to do a lot more DPS than if you were using Resolute Technique. I also use the hybrid elemental penetration nodes here. I've considered getting the lightning damage wheel here, but this cluster here is actually quite more effective in terms of passive efficiency. This character is currently level 90, so future points will likely include more life on the life wheel. As you can see, I almost have 6k, as well as this spell damage node here, and potentially I can path into the spell damage nodes and elemental damage nodes into Templar if I want more DPS. Again, we have 5 power charges, and now I'm finally going to explain how the charge generation on this build actually works. So first source, obviously, is from attacking. Second source is from the occasional Blade Vortex, which is around us. And then our other sources are from when our spells hit. Now, there's an interaction between Ramira's Banquet and Ball Lightning, and this is what it is. So if an enemy is afflicted by a status ailment, Ball Lightning will generate a power charge for every time it ticks on them, and it ticks 5 times a second. So what this means is that against enemies like bosses and the like, we can frequently get up to the 5 power charge mark before the discharge actually triggers. So what this means is that this build is able to actually make use of the 5 power charges that it has when fighting against bosses and single targets. And again, discharge is the main skill, but Ball Lightning helps significantly with the power charges. This build does almost pure lightning damage, and the Lightning Penetration gem enhances that quite a bit. Now coming up there will be a gameplay piece, and I hope you guys enjoy. Alright. Alright, so here you can see I'm going to run an old tier 10 map. So this is a level 77 map. Pretty standard things. And you can just see a general indication of how the build's going to perform. One of those bosses, his essence train brought us a little low there, but I was able to flash through it. Also, those bosses, as they are totems, are immune to curses, so we didn't have any of our life leech there. Also important to note that that essence strain had a poison on hit from the map mod, so it did a lot of damage. And that is the map. Now, it's important to note that this build performs a lot better video. So, alright, so if you have any questions or comments about the build, and it's something you're interested in doing yourself, let me know, and I'll be happy to help you out. But until then, that's going to be the update on my 2.4 budget Voll-less Mjolner guide. I hope you enjoyed, and see you guys later.